Hey, Dr. Jeff, you also do a pretty nifty, pretty clever, very hilarious line in TikToks, and I've spotted them on your Instagram at Dr. Jeff Foster. Tell us about those.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm not sure how witty they were originally designed to be. It was just kind of a way for me to vent the frustration or irritations of my morning in a slightly humorous way, and it's just developed into something I quite enjoy doing. So yeah, thanks.
And you get lots of great feedback about them because they really humanize you.
Yeah, I do think that medicine can be quite a serious topic, and sometimes as a doctor, it's nice to do something just a little bit more lighthearted. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I love the recent one you put up, hyper caffeinated, literally doing a jig in your chair, and you've got, an array of coffee cups to the right, and you're just dancing around.
Yeah, the main beauty of that was that after the 10 or 12 coffee cups were used, I got to leave them so that the receptionist got really angry for not putting my cups away at the end of surgery. So it had a win-win situation really for me.
You could annoy someone within the group. Fantastic.
Exactly.
Now, you're a general practitioner, a GP here in the UK, a family doctor elsewhere. Aren't all GPs specialists in men's health? I'm thinking about, the prevailing narrative in women's health circles is that mainstream medicine is all about catering to men. The system, the education system, it was made by men, designed by men, predominantly for men.
Totally. I completely agree with you. And yet, if that is the case, why are we so bad at it? Um, if you've had decades of male centered medicine run by doctors who were largely men, then it seems absolutely bizarre that the age gap of death between men and women hasn't closed in over 100 years. The fact
Well,
that
it's
men still
closing a
die
little bit now. It used to be 10 years, now it's four
marginally.
years. 4 years here in the
Yeah.
UK. 79 for
I
you
think,
blokes and 83 for us women.
yeah, I think also that even if you could say there is an improvement, I think it doesn't outweigh the enormous alleged male-centered medical approach that we've had for so long. And also, it's a different type of medicine. So there is, I don't know, cardiology. You deal with someone's heart, but you deal with everybody's heart. And the problem with medicine as the way it is now is that everything is becoming increasingly splintered and more Americanized, actually, so that we look at that specialty, then the subspecialty and the subspecialty, and fewer of us are looking at as a patient as a whole.
Yes.
So if you are going to do men's health and you want to do it properly, then really you need to look at more than just the fact this person's got testicles. You need to look at their lifestyle and their psychology and the fact that hormones will interact with their cardiovascular risk and all of those bits and put them together. And that's why I do it, really.
Well, you're sort of adopting, you're a GP and you're working within the NHS, the national government funded health system here. And they are, policymakers, and there's endless talk around how to reform the NHS and move it away from reactive body parts medicine, where everything is, as you said, fragmented, into something more preventative. But, it's Titanic in all the oceans, isn't it? I mean, switching that around, it's very difficult to do without doing what you've done. So you're still working within the NHS, but you've also set up a private clinic that can spend more time with men who need your assistance.
I think anyone that's familiar with the NHS will know this. Not only is it chronically underfunded, but also primary care or family medicine, however you want to refer to it, is now so overstretched that we get an average of 7 or 8 minutes per patient. Our practice has, I think, 8, 9 doctors, and we have nearly 16,000 patients. So to have the luxury of being able to spend half an hour with a patient and develop a rapport with somebody takes just months, if not years. So whilst it is a shame that people have to pay for this stuff, especially medical services, um, private medicine affords you those luxuries. And sometimes if you're going to make that jump to a better care system, you're going to have to pay for something that we just can't offer in the NHS anymore.
Yeah, and I loved looking at your, it's H3 Health, your clinic, because I was surprised because I know that you specialize in men's health and we'll define that as we go, but you also have 50% of the clinic is menopause as well. So I love how you're combining the two.
Honestly, my biggest thing, even though, yes, I totally specialize in men's health, is I keep saying that I genuinely don't think when it comes to menopause and testosterone, men and women are that different. And I know we'll probably talk about it at some point, but I think all the stuff around testosterone deficiency mimics a lot of symptoms in menopause. And if you have a man who goes through the same symptoms and his partner goes through the same symptoms, if you both understand how each other are being affected, it makes life so much easier. So I think the more we can make medicine cohesive, the better it'll end up becoming, really.
No, absolutely. It's the direction of travel that we are all rooting for. So, chapeau for doing what you're doing. Andropause, testosterone deficiency, menopause it's called. Let's get into that as one of the primary things that you help men deal with. How prevalent is it? I mean, what is andropause first? Let's just define it.
So andropause or male menopause or testosterone deficiency, however you want to really refer to it, is largely just the decline in testosterone that men feel as they get older. There are various different types of testosterone deficiency, and it can be due to a medical problem, it can be due to trauma, it can be due to cancer, it can be due to anything. But the biggest and most common cause is just simply you get older. And after the age of 30, you reduce your production of testosterone by about 1% a year. And obviously, there are things you can do to speed that up. So if you're really unhealthy, you had a terrible diet, and maybe you've had lots of other medical problems, you didn't do any exercise, then your testosterone drops faster. And if maybe you were really healthy, did lots of exercise, had regular sex, ate really good diet, then you could try and slow down that rate. But no matter what you do, you will not have the same level of testosterone when you are 30 that you have when you are 70. It's gonna go.
But
And
isn't it just a gentle decline? The problem
yes,
for women with menopause, as you well know, is, it's a cliff drop. I mean, it disappears, our estrogen, our progesterone. And now, increasingly, here in the UK, I've had a podcast with Dr. Zoe Hodson, who's really waving the flag to get testosterone as the third leg of the body identical HRT stool. So, I mean, isn't it just, a gentle kind of lessening? You said 1% per year. I mean, but
yeah.
can it be more dramatic for men?
The way you should think, way we always try and think about it is menopause is like this, so then bang. Whereas testosterone is just kind of slow down, and you're fine until you reach a threshold. So usually when blokes testosterone levels hit below sort of 12 nanomoles per liter, then they start to get symptoms. So you probably could be fine for X number of years while it drops and drops and drops, and it's really subtle and it's slow, and then suddenly it hits that point and you start to get symptoms. But if you are going to do that, that's the real difficulty with testosterone deficiency, is because it's so gradual for most blokes, you often misinterpret that as just a natural process of getting older. Because of course, if you're 50, then you shouldn't want to have sex as much as you did when you were 20, and you don't have the same energy because you've got a busy job and you've got kids and your lifestyles are different. And
I mean, but
so
could
you
you
put all those.
physically, if your testosterone wasn't flagging, you could have as much sex. It's just that the cultural conditioning as well is that, oh, you're older, so of course you want your slippers in the sofa. Whereas you,
Totally.
started lifting weights and maybe cut back. I know you're not a big fan of keto, but, reduced your carbs and your sugar and started eating whole foods. As you say, these are lifestyle interventions that could improve your testosterone levels.
Totally. Yeah. Very few people, I think, who are in their 40s and 50s have the luxury of living the lifestyle they had 30 years before. And it's not to say that lifestyle isn't a big factor, but it's just that sometimes it can be misconstrued as a lifestyle problem when actually this was the hormone that was just getting lower. And despite all those great efforts, it's just making everything harder.
Right. I mean, are the symptoms that low testosterone produces analogous to menopause or perimenopause?
Yeah, I mean, except for the fact we're clearly not going to have periods, I'd say it's basically the same. So earliest symptoms guys notice is that they have less energy, they feel more tired, they find that their memory's not quite as good, and they lose that kind of drive that you get. So, that wanting to do stuff, that urge to go out and get your job done. And then you notice more subtle change. So the subtle changes become less subtle. So you might find, for example, that when you go to the gym, it becomes harder to maintain that muscle mass that you had maybe a few years ago. You might find that it becomes just tougher to keep your fat levels down. You eat less, you eat healthier, but you're still putting on weight. And you think, like, well, I just did the same as I did 5 years ago. Why is it getting harder? You often find that sex drive goes down as well. And then as it gets much more advanced, you then find you get true erectile dysfunction. You can even get night sweats, get flushing, you get irritation. We had one patient who was diagnosed with dementia. She's about 75. And it was the classic brain fog that women talk about in menopause. But because no one had thought it could be a hormonal issue, it was told it must be cognitive and it must be Alzheimer's. Well, of course, it was testosterone.
Oh, wow. So what's a good level? Because this isn't a generic test that men get, is it? I mean, I would have thought if you were trying to do holistic medicine with a panoramic view, you'd start testing because you said men start to lose testosterone at the rate of 1% a year in their late 20s, which
Yeah,
shocks me, but
yeah,
but it definitely is, testament to all of these personal trainers that are influencers now who are 28 and 29 and say, it's calories in, calories out, nothing to do with hormones, just push away from the pie table.
yeah. I mean, if you were going to get a personal trainer, I wouldn't be particularly interested in getting one in their 20s, because I think largely that they can do what they want and they're going to get fitter.
Yeah.
It's not such an effort. You really want to see somebody in their 30s, 40s, or 50s that's still really good, because then you know that actually they've put the work in, and then it's showing the difference, really, I guess. But that's an unfair slant on many, I'm sure,
No, no,
younger
no, but
personal
is it,
trainers who are trying.
but when I was 22, I just ate fewer calories, showed a little bit of restraint, and bingo, next day, flat tummy, all the rest. I mean, it is
Yeah.
our biology. So let's go to the levels then. I would, how does a guy that's 35, how does he discover, oh, wow, I may have low testosterone?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is never just go randomly get a blood test. Because the difficulty with testosterone in particular, as well as most of the blood tests, is that most bloods we do in medicine are set in context of what you're asking. So, for example, do you want to know the free testosterone? Do you want to know the total testosterone? What time of day was it taken? What type of blood test was it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we get lots of patients who will come in and they send an email saying, yeah, I've had my blood test done at 2 o'clock via a finger prick test, and it showed my testosterone was 1, and I did it another day and it was 19. What does this mean, et cetera, et cetera. So really, I would always say the first step you should do is go by how you feel, not by what your blood test may or may not be. Because the other big problem we have with testosterone is there are lots of other conditions that can mimic testosterone issues, like thyroid disease, vitamin D deficiencies, anemias, et cetera, et cetera. And if you just go have your test and the test says it's absolutely fine, you've kind of reassured yourself and said, I must be okay then. It mustn't be a medical problem because my testosterone was normal. Whereas in fact, there was something else in the background. So having a discussion with a doctor is really important to make sure we test you for the right stuff.
Well, let's
In
talk
terms of
about those levels, though. So sorry, but
yeah.
just to get back to that 70-year-old, what would we be looking for? And if we did go to you and get a test as being seriously deficient, along with the other things that you're going to look at.
So if we just focus on total testosterone for a sec, we would want your levels to be between 15 and 13 nanomoles per liter. Now that is age irrelevant. So whether you're 25 or 75, if you have symptoms and your levels are not in that range, then we would consider saying that you have a lower testosterone. We would certainly want to consider treatment if the level is below 12 nanomoles per liter. So there's that middle ground of 12 to 15, which we do treat some people not, depending on how they feel with some other bits. But generally, if it's below 12 nanomoles per liter as a total, you've got low testosterone.
And the symptoms, I've read somewhere that the big red flag symptom would be erectile dysfunction, a less healthy, less robust erection. And that could be the first signal of a real problem to come down the track.
I I think you have to have some sexual dysfunction, but we've had a large number of patients actually who don't have ED or erectile dysfunction as their major presenting complaint. And for these guys, it's been more either the concentration brain fog side or the physicality side, that they just can't get through their day without having to rely on caffeine just to be able to function. And for those guys, the sex is there, but often they just haven't thought about it. It's not a big issue. And certainly if you perhaps have been either not in a relationship or not in a relationship where you're having sexual activities of any form for a while, then you may not be thinking of that as an issue. So you might
Right.
still have all the other stuff, but just not considered sex. So I think sexual function's definitely a major red flag sign, but actually a lot of patients will have other stuff before they even get near thinking about that.
And for the 70-year-old, it was a simple matter of topping it up, to remedy his deficiency.
It, yeah, I mean, I'd love to say it's more complicated, but it really is that simple. Once we
Jeez.
screened to make sure there was nothing else going on, his level was catastrophically low, and we gave him injectable treatment, and he bounced back within 2.5 weeks. It was great.
Amazing. I find that absolutely fascinating. And, we're finding the same sort of linkages for menopausal women as well. We need these hormones. We're living longer. We do not want to go through our lives with these deficiencies, or at least I know I don't. And I don't want, I mean, you probably have the numbers on osteoporosis to mind more than I do, but I was shocked to read in your book that men can also suffer from osteoporosis because of a deficiency in testosterone.
So, as you rightly pointed out before, that women need testosterone, men also need estrogen. And the only way that we can really get estrogen is by having suitable amounts of testosterone. And the two are so closely linked. So you cut away someone's testosterone completely, and they're likely to become osteoporotic because they don't have any estrogen either. There's a link between the way you have testosterone and it metabolizes and actually forms estrogen in men. So a percentage of your testosterone converts to a female hormone, and without that you actually need estrogen for sex drive and good erectile dysfunction, but you also need it, of course, for bone density. So we always think about osteoporosis in women, but actually men with low testosterone is a major trigger. And certainly blokes with prostate cancer, who we've been giving anti-testosterone medication to, we need to think much more carefully about, do these guys need to have bone protection at an early stage?
Oh, wow, because that would be like, women who have breast cancer, they're put on estrogen blockers, and that can create a cascade of issues.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're a lot more similar than we give ourselves credit for.
I just am astonished because why hasn't somebody had this panoramic view? Hormones are driving everything, and we have had this fragmented, siloed medical system and education. The cardiologist for this, and here's some statins, and we're only, it feels like, coming to grips with emerging science and knowledge recently, or is it maybe just doing this podcast? I'm noticing it more.
Uh, I think it's because medicine expands at such a rate that it becomes almost impossible to step back and offer or even look at it in more holistic roles these days. If you go into cardiology, you don't become a general cardiologist anymore. You then subspecialize in either heart failure or maybe conduction medicine or something, and you subspecialize. So the idea of actually going in the opposite direction seems almost a bit archaic now. It's not like 200 years ago we could know all of medicine as a doctor. You have to know your little bit. But maybe that's not a good thing.
I heard you describe the andropause, the incidence of andropause, as a forgotten epidemic. What is the prevalence of this? What percentage of men in the UK, let's say, or men in general globally?
So, yeah, it depends which study you look at. The most recent ones we tend to look at give an estimation of around 10 to 11% of men over 50 have a confirmed diagnosis of testosterone deficiency. Currently in the UK, there's about nearly 1 million men with confirmed low testosterone. The difficulty is there is a difference between low testosterone on a blood test and symptomatic menopause, andropause, whatever you want to call it. So there are probably thousands of more men trundling along around with low testosterone who don't know that their feelings of lethargy and low sex drive and just getting on badly with their wife is actually due to a hormone problem rather than a lifestyle issue. And this is why I refer to it as like this forgotten epidemic,
Yeah.
because there are probably thousands more men that just don't even know they should be thinking about this.
Well, I think the messaging that we get is, oh, life is so stressful. And we know now, we've had 2 years of COVID. We've been marinated in cortisol. I mean, managing stress. And I live in London. I know you're in Warwickshire, is it? Is it
Yeah,
Leamington
yeah.
Spa? Is it a gentler lifestyle there? Because here it can be quite stressful. Anytime you are invited to a party, you've got to calculate, oh, it's going to be 90 minutes on 7 trains, back and forth. And
Um, Well, I wouldn't say public transport. That's good here, so it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Um,
But your stress
Generally,
level
I
is
think
more manageable.
stress is relative. You can be in the center of Chelsea and be the most stressed guy in the world, and you can be in the center of Leamington and be exactly the same. It's how you perceive stress and how you manage your own risk. Everywhere has had, I think, big challenges in the last 2 years. I don't think London's any different. I think
No,
it's
I
just
mean,
how
I
we all
suppose it's
personally manage
just,
the process.
yeah, kind of silly of me to localize it geographically. But in general, we hear in popular mainstream media, it's all about stress, 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 and you've got to manage your stress, and you've got to start journaling and meditating, and of course, do your hit sessions at the gym and find what you like to blow off the steam.
Many of us, I think, are so het up on telling people how to avoid stress, as if we say this to patients. If you want to try and improve your testosterone, make sure you're not stressed. If you want to reduce your cardiovascular risk, don't be stressed. No one ever comes in and goes, I need a bit more off. I need a bit more stress. I love a bit of stress. No one ever says this. It just
Yeah.
seems such a pointless statement to make. I think really what we try and do is just to say to people, what can you do to try and give yourself time to try and reflect on your own activity? One of the only positive things about the whole COVID experience was that for loads of people in society, because their job and their normal activities of life were just suddenly stopped, it gave everyone a chance to say, well, what is really a priority for me? What do I have to go back to? And that's been really useful in terms of reducing stress and improving our own reflection of how we look at our lives.
Yeah, I mean, now we've got that additional unexpected surprise from Vladimir Putin, raging war on Ukraine, which is terrifying and appalling, and it's adding more stress. But there's also some research, which I've actually made some bids for some academics who are doing work on stress and almost trying to rehabilitate the word, because as we know, it's about mindset, how you approach it. Some stress can be good as long as you don't treat it negatively and use it as an excuse, for maybe not hitting the gym or going for a walk, going for a
Yeah,
long walk, and doing the lifestyle maneuvers that are going to improve your mental health, improve your physical health.
totally agree.
I'm just stating things instead of asking you questions. So let's give you a question. Are you finding with the men that come to your clinic are engaging in dodgy behavior, going to the backs of men's health magazines or the guy at the gym and getting sketchy products to take care of what they see maybe without consulting a doctor as a low testosterone issue?
I think a lot of blokes in all aspects of their health will do anything to avoid seeing a doctor if they can. And I think this is a massive cultural and societal problem that is only very marginally improving. I think a really good example of this is in terms of mental health. So if you look at mental health in general, as guys, we are very bad at managing it. So we have higher rates of depression formally diagnosed in women, but higher rates of suicide in men. And this is largely due to the fact that men simply just do not open up and talk about these issues, and they leave it and leave it and leave it. And that's always been a cultural thing that
Yes.
guys, you don't talk about your problems, you stiff upper lip, etc., etc. And there have been lots of or some recent high profile media activity. So there was a documentary, I think, I can't remember, BBC One, one of the other channels, which had one of the Kemp's kids, Ronan Kemp, something, did a documentary on how his friend had committed suicide. And you think this is really good because it's him talking about mental health. It highlights an issue. But the problem is it doesn't target the right people. So we get younger people coming in a lot now talking about mental health problems, but a lot of them aren't really mental health problems. So even today, we've had somebody who rang up because he's been dumped by his girlfriend, which I agree could be very traumatic, but wasn't really a reason they needed to speak to an emergency doctor. Whereas the older age groups, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, are still very much of a, well, I don't talk about that issue and I shouldn't be bringing that up. And it's not something we talk about as a sign of weakness. And even if you did want to, we are sending mixed messages because, my son's rugby, if they get hurt, they still make phrases like, don't cry like a girl, man up, this kind
Oh,
of stuff. And it
so
still has it
sad.
embedded in the culture. So I think it's very hard as a younger guy coming forward now to say, where do I fit in society? I'm told that I'm supposed to talk about my feelings, but I'm also told that I'm supposed to be really tough and not talk about it. So it can be really hard. So going back to your original point, which I've just waffled on about, really is just that I wouldn't be surprised if most men, before they come to see me, will have tried various options, either back of a gym, internet, anything, because if they can solve the problem themselves without having to go through that process of seeing a doctor, it's probably always better.
Yeah.
Of course, we know it's not, because it often gives you the wrong diagnosis, or you end up injecting chip fat into your buttock thinking it's a steroid, and then things go wrong.
Oh God. I mean, it's the wild, wild west out there. I mean, because they might only have the link to the gym, um, but they need to go and see someone like you for the full MOT, the full well man, yeah, checklist of the things you do. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
do when people go and say, "Look, I want that service. I can't deal with the 7 minutes." I mean, these are, I suppose, the quite evolved, self-aware men who come to visit
Yeah.
you.
No, I think if you're coming to see us for an MOT, you already have a vested interest in wanting to make sure you are healthier. So these tend to be men or women, because obviously there's the female side of what we do, but these are people that have said, I've hit a point in my life and I'm interested in health and I want to do better than just either what my NHS can offer me or that I could buy online or buy a supplement. And it's useful because you can pick out the disease you've got now, which is great. We can screen you for that. That's really helpful. But also, what can I prevent happening in the future? And this is where it comes down to what is good medicine now. If I do my job really well, yes, you may take a pill, you may have to do more exercise, I may make you eat more omega-3 in your diet, but I'll stop you having to see that cardiologist in 20 years because you never had that heart attack. And that's the key. So what can I do, no matter what age you are, to prevent things getting worse in the future? And that's a decent health check, MOT, really.
Yeah. And would you advise men having that starting at 30 so you can get a
Yeah,
baseline
good idea.
view of everything that goes much deeper than the
Look,
GP, which is 7 minutes and maybe a blood test every couple of years?
I I think not to do a disservice to what I do as part of my other day job, but it's so restricted now and we are so tight that we are just firefighting all the time. And you never get the luxury of time and that ability to do preventative and proactive medicine. So if somebody comes in to see us, you get an hour to do your health check. I mean, you would never get, I don't get an hour with a patient in the NHS. So we get an hour with a patient, we do full history, risk factors, we look at family history, diet, exercise, nutrition, anything that could be impacting on your life as it is now. And then you do a full physical, top to toe, do all the other aspects of that, ECGs, urines, everything we need to do. And then the most important bit, which I think is where it differs to every other health check, is that we do a blood test that's tailored to your risk. So what really this is why I really did this. It wasn't the health check thing was different to the men's health thing. This is because health checks have been a bugbear of mine for many years now. And I always used to get irritated that if you look and you go online, you can pay like £1,000 for a health check. And yet the health check they give you is basically the same if you're an 80-year-old man or a 20-year-old woman. They just change two numbers and they go, oh, women. So you tick that box, men, tick that box.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
But it's not. And the point is, if you're going to spend all this money, you want something that's personal to you, that says, I don't have boobs or ovaries. I don't
Yeah.
want to have that same set of tests. You want something that's personal, and you want somebody to be able to say, well, look, we looked at those things, and I think it's really important we look at your dementia risks of your mother. So let's change the blood test and look for that, et cetera, et cetera. And then it becomes useful. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive set of generic tests that you could have picked up offline, really.
It would be wonderful if you reach a stage where, corporates, employers are starting to recommend because, you've got private system, but to get all of their employees, buying into the health and well-being piece that is increasingly prominent, it would be great if every employee could, start work after a week and get that sort of a test done. And yeah,
Yeah.
snapshot of how they're going. You mentioned heart disease. We've had a spate of high profile people having heart attacks and dying from them. Uh, the big middle years, which I loosely define in these days of longer lives as mid 40s through early 70s, that's when many of the killer diseases take root or take lives outright. Why do you think so we're still having cardiovascular disease as the biggest killer in this day and age?
Because we're really bad at managing it, really, is the key. I think if you ever said to a patient, what do you think, if you just take an average person, not even someone who's been to my clinic, and said, what do you think you need to do to get healthier? They're going to say, I need a better diet, I need to exercise more, I need to lose some weight, I need to control my blood pressure, etc., etc. But we just don't do it very well. And the problem is, again, not only do we not have a lot of time to really focus on what things we can achieve, we don't aggressively manage a lot of these risks, but also life is remarkably tempting, and things that we can get now are so bad for us, but remarkably easy to obtain, that on one hand, you've got all of us lot saying, stop eating that, don't do that. Yeah. Then you go to Sainsbury's or supermarket afterwards, and you can pick up like a litre's worth of squash and cake and go home and gorge yourself until you feel better about the fact you've just been told you're overweight.
Absolutely.
So,
you can have a sugar coma wherever you go. It's an obesogenic environment. And I was thinking back to, you said you had a young guy call, and I broke up with my girlfriend. That can be a spiral into comfort eating and blood sugar and insulin spikes. And when you're down and out, you don't feel like getting the exercise and doing that thing of getting up at first light and seeing the horizon and running around the park.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I want to move on to prostate cancer, because ovarian cancer, I know because my mother died of it, it's known as the silent killer of women, and bloating can be the only telltale symptom. Is prostate cancer more or less the equivalent for men? Very few symptoms?
No, prostate cancer is actually pretty easy in terms of symptom wise to pick up. The problem with it is that it's almost identical in symptoms to a benign or non-cancerous, just big prostate. So the problem is that your prostate is usually about the size of a walnut when you're younger. I mean, that's not really a walnut, but walnut size. And your urethra runs through it, the tube you pee out of as a guy. And as you get older, that prostate gets bigger. And obviously at some point, it's going to start squishing the tube. And when it starts to squish the tube, your urine isn't as good as it used to be. And I did write this in the book, but this was a real event. And really, it was when I was at an Indian restaurant with my son a year or two ago. We were both standing there peeing, and I realized that he's hilariously laughing with his pee going up above his head. And I looked down and think, God, mine's pathetic.
Barely a trickle.
What's happened? Yeah. And you just think, at what point did I realize I couldn't do that anymore? That thing, I mean, you probably don't know, but at school when we used to stand like a meter, 2 meters back from the urinal and see how far we could get in, and all this sort of thing just disappears as you get older, and that's normal because your prostate is getting larger, your flow is getting less. But at some point that might start to cause symptoms. So you might start getting up at night, and you might find that you dribble a bit afterwards, or you can't go properly, and that's hesitancy, or you're not emptying properly. And once you start to get those symptoms, that's a sign that something is squishing your urethra. Now, the big difference is that if it's cancerous, it can still squeeze the urethra, but so can just a large prostate. The main way to tell the difference largely is just time. So a large prostate will grow over many, many years and be nice and gradual, whereas cancer tends to, but not always, just grow faster. So the onset of symptoms more quickly. Obviously, if you're peeing blood, if you've got bone pain, if you feel unwell, that's different. And that's an obvious thing that something's not right. But the problem with prostate cancer is it can be very easy to miss with someone who's just got a normally but large prostate. So yeah, a little trickier.
And what causes over the years a prostate to get large?
Testosterone.
Oh, right.
That's the big problem. So it's a perfectly testosterone sensitive organ. If you want to stop people getting prostate cancer, you just take away all of their testosterone. But the problem is, of course, as a guy, we like to have testosterone. It's quite nice. It makes you a guy. And the interesting thing is just reducing your testosterone. So you could argue, is it worth those guys who have lower testosterone levels staying low because it will reduce their prostate cancer risk? And actually the evidence is it doesn't.
Oh,
Just
wow.
it's almost more of a binary thing. You've either got it or you don't. And if you've got testosterone, you're going to get the risk of prostate cancer. If you have no testosterone and completely remove it, then you probably got away with it. But we give anti-testosterone meds to patients that have had certain types of prostate cancer to prevent it growing back in case there was any remnants. And these guys have horrible, classic, severe menopausal symptoms. You know, they get night sweats and flushing, and their muscle mass goes, and they get boobs, and they feel awful. And that's the problem of taking testosterone away completely.
So does estrogen then become, for lack of a better word, dominant relative to
Exactly.
the declining
Yeah.
testosterone?
Remember, as we said, it's all about that ratio. And suddenly you've taken one away completely. So you don't need much estrogen as a guy to have problems. But if you've got no testosterone, then it's going to be an issue.
And if you've got a partner that is roughly the same age and you're a midlife woman, if they suddenly start getting more weepy and cuddly, that's a sign as well, isn't it?
Of cancer or low prostate?
No, not cancer,
Sorry, low
just
testosterone.
declining progest not, right hormone, Susan, declining testosterone.
Yeah, but it's weird, isn't it? Because if you had your partner and she's maybe 50-ish, just for example, and she started to become more weepy or irritable or something, you'd make sort of a jovial comment as a bloke, go, oh God, they're probably going menopausal, aren't they? You know, and yet you'd never think to say, God, my husband is an irritable bastard. I bet he's got low testosterone. You just, the same analogy doesn't fit. And that's just because we don't know about it. But
Yeah.
actually, it really does fit. And that was actually a really good case study of the guy, the one that started us off the whole thing in the book about testosterone deficiency, because it was a real case of a guy who came to see me purely because he was initially so sick of listening to his wife talk about menopause, until at one point he was at dinner with their friends and her friend was talking about menopause, and his phrase was, if I have to listen to her talk about her dry vagina one more evening, I will lose it. And then he had this kind of light bulb moment and went, oh my God, I get night sweats and I have no libido and I feel irritable. And that was the impetus to come and see us, because he realized something wasn't right. He knew it wasn't menopause, but he knew something was matching her and couldn't work out what it was.
God, think of the marriages that could be saved or long-term relationships that could be saved
Yeah.
if we knew more about perimenopause, which is when we get itchy, bitchy, twitchy, and men for the same. They get grumpy and demotivated and crushed by the simplest outing socially. It's we just how do we raise awareness aside
I
from
think
getting
it's
everyone to
worse.
look at your YouTubes and read your book?
Well, I mean, obviously that is the way, because I don't see what other options there are really. But um, I think it's really interesting when we look at patients that have had treatment, but it's one of them. So we've often picked up men as well when wives have started HRT and they suddenly have this surge in their overall health and lifestyle and feel better. And the guy actually had very similar symptoms, but was riding on the fact that because his wife was the same, he didn't have to do anything. And yet now suddenly she wanted to have sex again and wants to go out and exercise and be sociable. And he's thinking, oh God, I can't face that. So it's that, like you talk about, doing things as a pair is really important. And when you
Yeah.
suddenly surge one ahead, the one that's left behind really struggles. So it makes an enormous difference.
Yeah, and if a husband becomes a dead weight, a lot of women are quite decisive. I'm out of here. This is enough.
I,
I'm going to get to be 83 years old. It's 82.9, the life expectancy here in the UK, and more in other. Depends on where you live, of course, the postcode lottery, but and the lifestyle lottery and all the rest. But yeah, you think about and we have the highest divorce rates, don't we, in that 45 to 55 span.
yeah, yeah, that's quite sobering, because I'm now in my 40s. So yeah, I won't let my wife watch this.
But you're so aware, you know what's happening. So
Yeah,
if
I mean,
you
I can drug people; they wouldn't even know, so it's fine.
I
It's
want to
not
get back to erectile dysfunction, believe it or not, because I don't think we've said all the words we need to on that. Because I understand from reading around, I over prepare for these things and read all these medical abstracts. And I thought that some sort of softening of your erection or loss of robust erection can point to cardiovascular disease and is sort of the canary in the coal mine for prostate cancer as well. But you say it's not as clear cut as that. So if you think you've got prostate cancer, you go to the GP if you're getting up at night and you get the PSA test.
Yeah. So probably before you, I don't think erectile dysfunction is a common symptom around prostate cancer. It's more flow. Um, and I would always suggest that if you've noticed symptoms change, so I don't mind which one it is, whether you're going more, whether it's difficulty starting, whether you're driven, it doesn't matter. If it's affecting you and it's affecting your activities of your daily living, you go see your doctor. He'll do a blood test, which is the PSA, and probably will do a rectal examination as well. If either of those are abnormal, then you go off for a scan. The success around rectal examinations is very varied, but I think if you're able to see your doctor now, which we should all be able to do, then having it does provide more information.
And does a diagnosis of prostate cancer mean the end of your sex life? You know, incontinence and impotency.
Oh God, no, 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 definitely not. So I'm not suggesting that anyone was going to want prostate cancer, obviously, but the survival rate is it's like 80 something percent at 20 years. It's really good. So the problem with prostate cancer is that my old urology boss, just before he retired, always told me that we were really good at picking out the kitten cancers, the ones that will slowly get at you over 20, 30 years, but will never really kill you. But we're really bad at picking out the tigers, the ones that are going to kill you in 3 months. Because the problem with those is that they will often give you a normal PSA test because they're so aggressive, they destroy the prostate and that enzyme doesn't go up, it goes down. You think it's all fine. But also by the time they present, they're already so nasty that the damage is already being done.
Oh,
You
wow.
notice how when it comes to things like breast screening and cervical screening, we have a national screening program that works and it's really successful. And yet, whilst you can go and ask for a PSA test, we don't have national screening for prostate cancer. So men are not
Seriously?
called. You notice it doesn't exist. There's no, you never get an age where you go, you need to go in for your yearly prostate screen because we don't have a test that's that good. The
What sort
PSA
of
is okay.
oversight is that? How did that
Well,
happen?
this is kind of what I mean in that going back to your original point, yes, medicine has been very, very, very male centered for a very long time, but we haven't done it very well. Um, so even though we have this PSA test, it's not brilliant. And it's really only been the last 3 or 4 years that we've started bringing in MRI scans for people that could have a query prostate cancer. Until then, if you had an abnormal PSA, you'd have to go in blind with a biopsy stick and just stab multiple parts of someone's prostate to have a guess that you might have hit the prostate that had a bit of had a bit of cancer in it. At least now the MRI scans are so good that you can basically eliminate prostate cancer much, much more successfully without traumatizing people's prostates.
So, as we are ordered after 50 to get a colonoscopy to detect bowel cancer or polyps and get them taken away, we
Mm-hmm.
should definitely be having that. I mean, why isn't there more of a campaign to get this going?
Because
So, we have mammograms and we have the prostate cancer assessment.
well, the reason largely is that you can't MRI every man from the age of 50 every X number of years because unfortunately the MRI itself is so expensive and so new that it's not a realistic way to screen every guy. It's a second step once you've got an abnormal PSA. You really want to be able to pick up a blood test or urine test or something that gives you an indication that you might have a problem. And at the minute we've got PSA, which as I say is all right, but it's just not great.
What about we get transvaginal ultrasounds? What about something that's like that? Radio frequencies. You would have
I
think this isn't a
I don't
huge
think you're going to
problem.
find many men who would be keen to have a wand probe stuck up their rectum to start checking their prostate every year or two.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
not pleasant for women. The crawling
no,
isn't
no.
pleasant for women. So, I mean, do you want the cancer eliminated and know your risk? Or, surely they could make a way that's less invasive.
Yeah, I just don't. I think to be fair, it's the MRI scan is just far more effective, and because with the MRI you can put a dye in and see
Right.
the abnormal cells, you just can't do that with an ultrasound. So even if we could use an ultrasound scan, it's just not going to be as good as the MRI will be.
In preparation for this, I looked up the stats, the equivalencies between incidence of breast cancer and prostate cancer, and found that they're identical. Breast cancer, 1 in 8 women; prostate cancer, 1 in 8 men. And yet, the difference beyond the numbers is in the quality of life? Because breast cancer needs treatment always, immediately. But as you said
Yeah.
earlier, prostate, it's sort of a watch and wait scenario. You can, 20
It
years.
depends which, yeah, it does depend which type of cancer you've got, obviously, in terms of your prostate. But um, generally, if you, the argument for a guy, because we know the prostate is testosterone sensitive, is if you live long enough, you will have prostate cancer. You're going to get it. You
Say
can't.
again?
If my plan is to live to a realistic 110, 120, something like that, maybe a bit longer. I don't know. So if I can get to that stage, I'm guaranteed that I will have some cancerous cells in my prostate. Now, it doesn't mean you have active prostate cancer that's going to kill you, but simply that the prostate is likely to have cancerous cells within it. So if you post-mortem a load of blokes who died in their 90s or 100s, you can guarantee almost all of them will have some abnormal changes. Of course, that's not the same as saying they have prostate cancer. That means they need treatment. And that's why watchful waiting is such a useful tool in prostate cancer, because
So
you
they can
don't
lie
need to treat
dormant and
everybody.
not be activated by anything and become,
Exactly. Yeah.
okay, metastasizing all over your body.
Got it. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. I want you to tell me more about, because we go deep in the science here on the Big Middle, dihydrotestosterone. How is that made? How does it give men the beer belly, which can also be derived from over drinking and consumption of sugar and processed food, and the hyper palatable processed foods that create turtle bellies and pot bellies and set people up for diabetes because they become insulin resistant. Tell me about the role of this DHT that I was reading about. How does it happen, and what are the signs of that occurring within a man?
Yeah, I do find it odd. We seem to focus in terms of dihydrotestosterone in the wrong sort of areas for this. So if you imagine the process pathway is that testosterone is, of course, I always think whenever you do medicine, just when you think you understand something, you realize there's another whole pathway of stuff that you didn't understand about, and it just keeps going and going. It's relentless. So you have your testosterone, and then the testosterone splits and is there then changed into various metabolites, including dihydrotestosterone and estrogen and various others that go along the pathway. Dihydrotestosterone is particularly, I would say, more important in terms of baldness and beards than any other aspect, and prostates in particular. So those are the big bits. Hair and prostates, I would always focus on DHT, because there is this idea. So, for example, one of the great medicines we use to reduce the size of prostate is a DHT blocker. And it just blocks the receptors in your prostate to the rest of your dihydrotestosterone that's flowing around. But the interesting thing is that the rest of your testosterone pathways are all okay. So you can still put on muscle in the gym, but your prostate continues to shrink. I mean, it's not perfect, and there are crossovers and there's side effects, etc. But the
But what
principle,
you may have already said this, and maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but is it sort of a substrate or a
yeah,
spin-off of testosterone?
yeah,
What's the
yeah,
science? Where
spin
does
off,
it
a bit
come
like
from?
spin off like Joey was with Friends, a slightly less successful version of the original. Um, so it's basically a metabolizing pathway, so that when you have a single hormone to start with, it's going to metabolize to other bits as it goes along. And for example, so it's just converted to various other bits to become active in the body. So you've got estrogen, you've got dihydrotestosterone, androstenedione, and various other metabolites of testosterone as it goes. Testosterone isn't active by itself, and it gets converted to lots of other stuff depending on which part of the body needs it. One big thing about DHT is that people imagine that if you're bald, then you must have more testosterone because it means you've got more DHT. So you must be more manly, and you must be more virulent and more of a man's man, etc., etc.
Yeah, we think
Whereas
about
actually,
Dwayne and Bruce, and they're bald, and
yeah,
they're kicking
and
it
like
in the action
and
flicks.
exactly, Danny DeVito, Duncan Goodhue, all the big names. So really, I think it all comes down to the sensitivity, sadly, of DHT, and nothing to do with your total testosterone. So you can be full of testosterone, but if you don't have many DHT receptors, you're not going to go bald. And the converse is also true, is that you can have a very low testosterone, but if you're really sensitive to dihydrotestosterone and you've got loads of receptors for this stuff in your head, then you're still going to go bald. And unfortunately, the link is not a straightforward linear thing. Even more interesting, of course, is that beards are also related to DHT receptors. So, for example, we had one patient who's a trans patient from female to male, and she's complaining he's complaining now that he is unable to grow a beard and saying, you're not giving me enough testosterone, therefore my treatment is not correct. And we say, well, actually, your levels are really good, but if just genetically you just don't have the hair receptors that are sensitive to DHT, you can have as much testosterone as you like. You're never going to have a massive beard. I mean, I'm 43 and I still can't get to link it up properly.
So you
My
barely
wife
need
says,
to
"Well, I grow it
shave.
properly." Does I look like a pubescent teenager trying to grow a mustache? So I can't. But there's nothing I can do about that.
That's
So
hilarious. This is my 3-day shadow and it's barely visible.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But on the plus side, you do find that people that have less DHT receptors in their face tend to be able to keep the hair on their head. And of course, the magic mix for a guy is if you've got someone who's just got enough DHT receptors, they can grow a full beard, but not too many that they start to lose the hair on their head.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
I remember my husband used to just spend hours at the mirror checking the thinning and telling me, "Oh, I've lost some more. I just don't know." And his
Yeah.
dad was bald and his grandfather was bald. I mean, is hair loss or hair thinning at least leading? Is it sort of an inevitability for most
No,
blokes? Um,
no, not at all. I mean, it's common. 50% of guys in their 30s will have some hair recession. So it's quite common. But no, you can do lots of stuff to stop it. What I would say, and I keep stressing this again because it's another one of my bugbears, which clearly I have lots of them, having had this discussion with you, is that a lot of the stuff you can buy is absolute rubbish. And most things you can put on your head, all these sprays and things, are generally complete crap. There are really only a handful of things that make a real difference to hair and hair quality. And you can go through the tests and make sure that you're not vitamin deficient and it's not thyroid disease and you're not short in vitamin D and B12 and iron, because they can all affect hair, and that's really true. But if we're just talking pure male pattern hair loss, then really it's minoxidil, which comes as Regain because it's the only brand that does produce it. So it's minoxidil, and that's a spray or a foam. And that's the only thing you can get over the counter that makes any difference. Everything else requires you to see a doctor. So if you go to any company and it says, we're different, we can produce hair results with a careful mix of zinc and selenium and dog poo, whatever, it doesn't do anything.
so
It's a
glad you
complete
worked in the
waste of
dog
time.
poop.
So yeah, I was trying to get it somewhere in the discussion.
Mm.
So it's just a complete waste of time, and you're just it's not doing it. So I think really I think the problem with a lot of the companies, supplements and medical companies, actually, is they're really preying on the desperation of guys who really want to keep their hair, but again, don't know the best way of doing it. And we're often told that if we're deficient in vitamins or something, we can improve. But actually, being in a Western society with relatively good diets, you're not going to lose your hair unless you're really sick.
But okay, diet, you mentioned the word. And I know you and I have clashing views because I was keto for quite a while and do intermittent fasting. And
I didn't even say that.
no, because I was keto for 2 years and, 20 grams of carbs only. But when we look at diet, and I just want how to wrap this up and make it tight because I know I've had you on for at least an hour. It's so important when we're looking at, I mean, just for hair health, what about stored iron, ferritin? And there are so many guys now that are backing away from the vitamin B12 and the iron that they will get in animal products. They would have to eat a lot of lentils, a lot of broccoli, and a lot of protein shakes, the whey powder to get the protein they need. Um, all the benefits of our evolutionary diet. Um, it's funny because I had a pal here for a couple of months, strict vegetarian stroke vegan. I swear he lived on crisps. That's all he was eating, crisps and biscuits. And he was getting up every morning at 6 o'clock. I don't know where he had the energy to do his calisthenics routine, but where did his protein come from? Where did his iron come from? He maybe ate an apple. He thought he was, this purest food camp.
You can get beef flavor crisps. So maybe,
Roast
I don't
chicken,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I
What's your
well,
advice on lifestyle, food, all of that?
I don't personally believe that we should be restricting or restrictive in almost any form of food. I think the whole key to successful dieting is moderation. And I think that most of us could do the tweak here and there, and we might need to reduce a bit of something and maybe improve a little bit of something else. But the vast majority of diets that argue or suggest to completely remove some type of food source from our diet is firstly not sustainable, and it's probably not particularly healthy in the long run. And you can often get very quick results from doing that, but you're trying to do something that you want to keep over your lifetime that's going to benefit your long-term health. And by making some part of a food source the enemy, then all you're really doing is providing an effect to reduce calorie intake over a shorter period. So, for example,
What
if
about
we said,
insulin sensitivity? I mean, and fatty liver, which is the silent scream of oncoming diabetes. As you get older, these things do get all mucked up, and your susceptibility for some of these chronic life challenging
yeah,
diseases.
but that doesn't mean you should cut out carbs completely, though, does it?
Well, but maybe not get them from the hyperpalatable, formulated junk that
Oh,
poisons
yeah. I
every
mean,
single. No, but this is why. I mean, the UK is why our incidence of COVID was so bad. We are an obese society, and I am not lithe and model-like, but I'm very, very healthy. And yes, I've got fat on my face. I don't know where it comes from, but I just want to be healthy and strong and have the strength to work out and all the rest. Health is more important than fitting into my size 6 jeans at this stage of the game. But I think we have this horrid environment in the UK. We, at every turn, we've got rubbish that beckons to people. And I just don't know. I mean, policy wise and messaging, we've got a nation of sugar addicts who can't
yeah,
moderate.
I agree. Um, I, but I would still argue that the point is to not say you never eat any more carbohydrate, or maybe even more, say you should never eat any sugar, because most of those things are very hard to achieve for 30 years. I think probably what I would prefer, or what I tend to tell people to do, is that that refined sugar is bad for you and that you shouldn't be eating it. But if it's your birthday, if you're going out for the evening, if you're meeting friends or something, and this is a rarity, don't beat yourself up about it if you've broken that once. It's not going to kill you. And you're more likely to be able to make long-term sustainable changes if you can genuinely stick to a much more palatable but healthier diet that is not so restrictive that you find each meal becomes a chore, and therefore you're snacking on crisps just to get through the fact you've had nothing but lentils.
Yeah, I must say though, I love this. I mean, I get all my carbs from vegetables and it's fantastic. So I don't feel deprived and it's very sustainable. But the birthday cake thing, I guess the other thing is I lived in France for 5 years and Geneva, which is the Francophonie bit of Switzerland, as you know. And I mean, the sociability, people sitting down, they don't have a bottle of wine on the sofa with a big family-sized bag of crisps. They have a lot of crisps, more than the UK, but they have them with a meal after they've had their vegetables, and they have the birthday cake after the meal. So, it's a much healthier way of ingesting the nutrition that you need, that we all need.
Yeah, I think many people in the UK, it's not just the food that's available, but it's the food habits and the way we eat that's particularly difficult. And if we can have a better understanding, or maybe a better self-reflection of what we need to do to be healthier, that does make a big difference. But it's really hard, and changing a societal approach to how we eat is a massive challenge. So I don't envy those guys.
Yeah, I think though, we need to make the change, don't we? Because, we have an aging population, and if we're all just spending the last 40 years of our lives feeling wretched and suffering from diabetes because we're, grabbing empty calories all day and
Yeah,
all night, it's absolutely ridiculous. And just before we go, because we do need to wind up, has it been an hour and a half? I just think you also are really hot on strength training as being something
yes, yeah,
that
very
you
much
do
so.
and that
So
you advise.
I was diagnosed as diabetic at 17. So
Oh.
I'm type 1 diabetic. And At the time, my consultant was very rigid and said, look, if you look after your diabetes, it will never get you. You will control it. And I think that's very true. Type 2, obviously, this is a different sort of discussion, but in terms of type 1, you have to rule it. And if you take control, you can stop it being a problem during the rest of my life. And I've been very lucky. I've never been in hospital with it. It's kept me under control. I've had no complications, etc., etc. And one of the big things you can do is strength training, because the general argument is the faster your metabolism, the more muscle mass you've got, the more metabolically active you are, the more it soaks up sugar and it just acts like a sponge. And the more I started to get interested in that, you find that it becomes a really good reflection around other medical problems as well, and lots of other general lifestyle benefits. And so, for example, in women, you can reduce osteoporosis by having strength training, but it also generates testosterone in men and women. And in fact, you can get a much better testosterone surge from intense, heavy, not heavy weights, but intense strength or intense exercise in general, versus the sort of slower, chronic, long walks, slow bike rides, etc., etc. The evidence really seems to be that 45 minutes, maybe 3 or 4 times a week of intense exercise of some form is the key to keeping you metabolically active and preventing some of those other health risks coming along. So yeah, massive advocate. I haven't had more than 2 or 3 weeks off in the gym in 25 years.
And how does that affect the amounts of insulin that you need to use on a daily basis? If you are still having, if you're doing the eat well plate and you're having carbs
Yeah.
dominating that plate.
Well, that's it. I don't, but I think it's different, I guess, going back to your original point, for type 1 diabetic versus your average person who may have the ability to go, actually, I'm just going to go eat a muffin. I don't see that as an option. Right. For me, that isn't that choice. But in terms of the amount of insulin you need, it's just massively reduced. But it's not so much about the amount you need, it's more about avoiding the spike. And we all know that spikes of insulin are very bad for you. And if you have a buffer and your muscle is a buffer, then you can get away with it a bit better. And your average person without diabetes will be able to get away with it more, because they will have less of a natural spike, because their muscles will just soak up the stuff a bit better. Just as the same, I can't produce that natural insulin spike, but at least my muscles can take some of that weight for me.
Right.
And it's proved well so far.
You must be familiar then with the 0-5-100 challenge. Dr. Ian Lake and a group of other type 1 diabetics who did a fasted 5-day run and walk from Henley-on-Thames to Bristol a couple of years ago. Do you recall that?
So his case is interesting. I think it highlighted a real ability to control blood sugar, even in patients or people who desperately need it to stay alive. But this, as I said, this wasn't actually a new thing. And this was what my consultant had told me when I was 17, that they had a case of a female patient who was 18 or 19. I think it was a long time ago, 26 years ago now. And she had done a desert run for 3 to 5 days with no insulin, and her levels had stayed absolutely fine. And that's the kind of thing that stuck in my head. So these are really, really good examples of how, if you are just metabolically active, whether you're diabetic or not, you can improve your blood sugar control. It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, final question. If you had magic wand control over the men's health area of medical practice, what would you like to see change tomorrow? If you could, or yesterday, just, your blare it out message.
Attitude. Just don't bury it. Don't accept it for normal. Don't say that just because I'm a bloke, this is okay, it's what I should do. If you think you might have a low testosterone problem, or you think you've got erectile problems, or you're not peeing properly, or even your mental health is struggling, you may not be able to see your GP at the minute in terms of it being an emergency, because I appreciate it is absolutely rammed, but you may have to pay, you may have to see a specialist to do this, but it can be a life-changing thing. And one of the best things I've done in men's health with regards to testosterone is you can see that change from what was a really low guy in whatever age group to having his life back. And that's as trite as it sounds, is kind of why you kind of do medicine, really, isn't it? To
Yeah,
make that change,
absolutely.
to make people feel better, and it really works. It's like it's really easy and it works. So
No, well,
yeah,
and for
by
women
all means,
too. For women too, testosterone is like rocket fuel when you're a
totally.
menopausal woman.
Just the best comparison we have is how you see menopause affect women and how they improve with HRT. And of course, you can do the same thing for guys, but the problem is men don't know to think about it, and they don't want to take the embarrassment or the stigma of losing their masculinity by maybe their testosterone not being what it was when they're younger. But really, as I say, it's such an easy thing to treat, and we can make such a difference. And I just hate the fact there are all these people, all these men going around the minute who probably feel dreadful but don't know to ask for help. But yeah.
Ah, well, hopefully we can get it into more ears. Thank you so much. What important, worthy work that you're doing. Really appreciate it, Dr. Jeff Foster, men's health specialist. That is the mother lode of evidence-based, holistic advice. He gives it to blokes who aren't used to asking for it, but clearly need it. I can't thank you enough, Jeff.
Thank you. Cheers for having me.
Jeff's book is Man Alive. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can buy it easily, one click away. And his clinic, h3health.co.uk. Head there, all kinds of information, articles to read up on. And if you want to see those captivating TikToks I was referencing at the outset, you can follow him on Instagram at Dr. Jeff Foster. Thanks again, and I'll be back with you in a couple of weeks. Ciao for now.
Cheers.